The clock on the wall showed 5:47 p.m. when Lisa walked through the heavy glass doors of Antonio's restaurant. Her shoulders ached from the double shift she had worked yesterday, and her feet were already protesting before her evening shift even began. She tied her black apron around her waist and checked her appearance in the small mirror by the employee entrance. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many late nights studying and too many early mornings serving tables. Antonio's wasn't just any restaurant. With its crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and prices that made most people think twice, it attracted the kind of customers who expected perfection with every meal. Lisa had been working here for almost 3 years now, ever since she started college. The tips were good enough to help pay for her music classes, but barely enough to cover rent, groceries, and the mountain of textbooks that seemed to get more expensive every semester. She grabbed her notepad and pen from her locker, the same ones she had used since her first day. The cover of the notepad was worn smooth from countless orders, phone numbers of difficult customers, and the occasional musical note she would jot down when inspiration struck during her breaks. Music was everywhere in her life, even in the most unlikely places. Tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the evening light streamed through the tall windows, or perhaps it was the gentle hum of conversation that already filled the dining room. Lisa walked onto the floor and immediately noticed him sitting at table 12, the corner booth that offered the best view of the restaurant. David Mitchell was impossible to miss. Even sitting down, his presence commanded attention. His perfectly pressed suit probably cost more than Lisa made in 3 months, and his confident posture suggested someone who was used to getting what he wanted. She had served him before, maybe 4 or 5 times over the past year. He always ordered the same thing: grilled salmon, no sauce, steamed vegetables, and sparkling water with lime. He tipped well, said please and thank you, but never really looked at her the way some customers did, like she was just part of the furniture. Tonight, he wasn't alone. 3 other people sat around the table, all dressed in expensive clothes, all talking with the kind of animated excitement that came with closing big business deals. Lisa could hear fragments of their conversation as she walked past other tables. Words like acquisition, market share, and board approval floating through the air. The thing that really caught Lisa's attention, though, was the piano. Right in the center of the restaurant, like a beautiful piece of art that nobody was allowed to touch, sat a gorgeous black grand piano. It had been there since the restaurant opened, and for the first 2 years Lisa worked there, an elderly man named George played it every evening from 6 to 9. His gentle jazz melodies created the perfect background for romantic dinners and business meetings alike. But George had retired 6 months ago, and the piano had been silent ever since. Every day Lisa walked past it, and every day she felt her fingers itch to touch those keys. She had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother had saved up for months to buy her an old upright piano, and Lisa had practiced on it religiously until she graduated high school and moved to the city for college. Now she was studying music education, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday, maybe even opening her own music school. But dreams didn't pay rent and piano lessons were expensive. She had to drop her private lessons 8 months ago when her car needed major repairs. The only time she got to play anymore was during her music theory classes, and even then it was just for a few minutes at a time. Lisa shook herself out of her thoughts and approached table 12 with her best customer service smile. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. Can I start you gentlemen with some drinks tonight?" David looked up from his conversation and nodded. "The usual for me, Lisa. Sparkling water, lime on the side." He turned to his companions. "Gentlemen, this is Lisa. She's been taking excellent care of me every time I come here." One of the other men, a heavy-set guy with graying hair, ordered a whiskey on the rocks. The other 2 wanted wine, a bottle of something Lisa was pretty sure cost more than her monthly grocery budget. As she walked away to get their drinks, she could hear them resuming their conversation. "The presentation went perfectly," David was saying. "The investors loved the projections for the 3rd quarter. We should have the funding approved by next week." Lisa tried not to eavesdrop as she prepared their drinks, but it was impossible not to overhear in the relatively quiet restaurant. From what she could gather, David's company had just secured some kind of major deal. The excitement in his voice was contagious, and she found herself smiling as she balanced the drink tray on her way back to their table. As she served their drinks, the heavy-set man gestured toward the piano. Beautiful instrument. Shame nobody plays it anymore. This place used to have such great ambiance. David nodded, taking a sip of his sparkling water. I've been coming here for 2 years, and that piano has been silent for months. It's like having a Ferrari in your garage and never driving it. The third man, younger, with perfectly styled blonde hair, laughed. Maybe we should request some music with dinner. I'm sure someone around here knows how to play. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. Without thinking, she found herself saying, "The piano needs tuning anyway. It's been sitting there collecting dust for so long." The words slipped out before she could stop them. All 4 men turned to look at her, and Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She was supposed to be invisible, professional, not commenting on the restaurant's decor or equipment. But David's eyes lit up with curiosity. "You know about pianos?" Lisa hesitated. She could lie, say she had heard the manager complaining about it and walk away, or she could tell the truth and risk looking foolish in front of these successful businessmen who probably wouldn't understand what it was like to have dreams bigger than your bank account. "I've been playing since I was a kid," she admitted quietly. "I'm studying music education at the community college." David leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation around them, the clink of silverware on plates, the soft murmur of other servers taking orders. But at table 12, everything felt suspended, like the moment before a storm when the air gets still and electric. "Interesting," David said slowly. His business partners exchanged glances, sensing something happening but not sure what. "And you think that piano needs tuning?" Lisa nodded. "The humidity changes with the seasons. If an instrument sits without being played or maintained, it starts to drift. The keys probably stick a little too." She was rambling now, nervous energy making her say more than she should. This wasn't her job. Her job was to take orders, bring food, smile politely, and collect tips. Her job wasn't to discuss musical instruments with millionaire customers or offer her opinions about restaurant atmosphere, but something in David's expression told her he was really listening. Not just being polite, but actually interested in what she had to say. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her like that, like her thoughts and knowledge mattered beyond whether she could remember who ordered the salmon and who wanted the steak medium rare. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty, while the rest of the restaurant continued its elegant evening rhythm all around them. David set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. The ice clinked softly against the crystal as he studied Lisa's face. There was something about the way she had spoken about the piano, with such quiet confidence and knowledge, that made him curious. In his world of business deals and board meetings, he rarely encountered people who were passionate about something beyond money and success. "So you really know how to play," he said. It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. Lisa felt her stomach flutter with nerves. She glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware that other customers might be watching this unusual conversation between a waitress and her table. "I've been playing for 15 years, she said softly. "Started when I was 7. The blonde man at the table, whose name Lisa had learned was Richard from listening to their earlier conversation, chuckled. 15 years? That's longer than some of our employees have been with the company. What kind of music do you play?" asked the heavy-set man whose whiskey sat untouched in front of him. His question seemed genuine, not the polite small talk that customers sometimes made while waiting for their meals. "Classical mostly," Lisa replied, her confidence growing slightly. "Some jazz. I was working on Chopin's Ballad No. 1 before I had to stop taking lessons." She caught herself, realizing she had revealed more than she intended about her financial situation. David's eyebrows raised. "Chopin? That's not exactly beginner stuff." "No, sir, it's not." Lisa shifted her weight from one foot to the other, very aware of how long she had been standing at their table. Other servers were moving efficiently through the dining room, and she knew she should be checking on her other customers. But something about this conversation felt important, like standing at the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to jump. The third man at the table, who had been quiet during most of the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "You know, David, remember what you were just saying about missed opportunities, about how success comes from recognizing potential that other people overlook?" David glanced at his business partner, then back at Lisa. A slow smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that Lisa imagined he wore when he was about to make a deal that everyone else thought was impossible. "Lisa," he said, and the way he said her name made her pay attention in a way that felt different from the usual customer-server interaction. "I have an idea. But first, let me ask you something. If that piano were properly tuned, if it were ready to be played, would you be able to perform something that would impress the people in this restaurant?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Lisa felt her heart start to beat faster. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant evening symphony. Servers moved between tables. Wine glasses clinked in toasts and quiet laughter drifted from various conversations. But at table 12, everything felt charged with possibility. "I think so," she said carefully. "I mean, it's been a few months since I played anything really challenging, but muscle memory doesn't just disappear." "Good," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out his phone. "Because I'm going to make you an offer that might sound crazy." Lisa watched as he scrolled through something on his screen, probably checking his bank balance or looking up information she couldn't imagine. The other men at the table exchanged glances that suggested they knew David well enough to recognize when he was about to do something unpredictable. "Here's the deal," David said, setting his phone on the table with the screen facing down. "I've built my entire business on taking calculated risks, on betting on people and ideas that others might overlook. Right now, I'm looking at a talented musician who's been forced to put her dreams on hold because life got in the way." Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. She had no idea where this was going, but every instinct told her that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. "I'm going to make you a wager," David continued. "If you can play that piano right now tonight, and if you can perform something that genuinely moves the people in this restaurant, something that makes them stop their conversations and pay attention, then I'll pay for the rest of your college education." The words hit Lisa like a physical force. She actually took a step backward, gripping her notepad so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me correctly," David said calmly. "Full tuition, books, fees, whatever it takes to finish your music education degree. And if you want to pursue further studies after that, we can discuss it." Richard nearly choked on the sip of wine he had just taken. "David, are you serious?" "Completely serious," David replied, never taking his eyes off Lisa. "I've spent the last 5 years investing in startups and small businesses, looking for diamonds in the rough. I've learned to recognize talent when I see it, and I've learned that the best investments are often in people, not just ideas." Lisa felt dizzy. The restaurant seemed to spin slightly around her as she tried to process what she was hearing. "But what if I can't? What if I mess up, or if people don't like it, or if I'm too nervous and my hands shake? Then you go back to serving tables and I pay for my dinner like always," David said with a shrug. "You have nothing to lose and everything to gain." The heavy-set man leaned forward. "David's not kidding, young lady. I've seen him make bets like this before. Last year he gave a kid money to start a food truck because he liked the sandwich the kid made for lunch. That food truck now has 3 locations and the kid just bought his first house." Lisa's mind raced. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen table, the student loan documents she hadn't been able to complete because she couldn't afford the payment plans. She thought about the piano lessons she had given up, the recitals she used to dream about performing in, the music school applications she had never sent because the tuition was impossible. "There's just one catch," David added, and Lisa's heart sank, waiting for the impossible condition that would make this dream offer disappear. "The piano stays untuned," he said with a slight grin. "If you're as good as I think you are, you can make beautiful music even on an imperfect instrument. The best musicians don't need perfect conditions to create something extraordinary." Lisa looked across the restaurant at the silent piano. From where she stood, she could see dust particles dancing in the light that fell across its black surface. She had walked past it hundreds of times, always wondering what it would feel like to sit at that bench, to let her fingers find the keys, to fill this elegant space with the music that lived inside her heart. "How do I know you're serious?" she asked quietly. David smiled and reached for his wallet. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back of it before handing it to her. "That's my personal phone number. If you decide to do this and if you succeed, call me tomorrow morning. We'll have lunch and discuss the details." Lisa took the card with trembling fingers. "David Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell Innovation Group." On the back, in neat handwriting, He had written his phone number and the words for the pianist. The restaurant continued its evening rhythm around them, but Lisa felt as if she were standing in the eye of a hurricane, in a place where everything was still and quiet and full of infinite possibility. "So," David said, settling back in his chair with that confident smile, "what do you say, Lisa? Ready to change your life?" Lisa stared at the business card in her hand, feeling like she was holding a winning lottery ticket that might disappear if she blinked too hard. The elegant restaurant continued its evening dance around her, but everything felt different now. The soft conversations from other tables seemed muffled like she was underwater, and her heart was beating so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She started, then stopped. Her mouth felt dry and her hands were starting to shake slightly. She looked at David, who was watching her with patient curiosity, then at the piano sitting in the center of the restaurant like a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. "Take your time," David said gently, "but not too much time. The dinner rush is about to start, and if you're going to do this, now would be the perfect moment." Lisa glanced around the restaurant. It was that magical hour just before the evening crowd arrived, when there were enough people to create an audience, but not so many that the space felt overwhelming. Maybe 30 or 40 diners scattered across the elegant dining room, most of them finishing their appetizers or waiting for their main courses. Her manager, Tony, was standing near the kitchen entrance, checking something on his tablet. He hadn't noticed the unusual conversation happening at table 12 yet, but Lisa knew that would change the moment she walked toward that piano. Tony was a good boss, fair and understanding, but he ran a tight ship. Employees didn't just decide to give impromptu concerts during their shifts. "What about my job?" Lisa asked, the practical part of her brain finally catching up to the moment. "I mean, what if Tony gets angry? What if I get fired for leaving my tables?" Richard, the blonde man at the table, chuckled softly. "Honey, if you pull this off, I don't think your manager is going to be angry. Trust me, we know a thing or two about taking calculated risks." The heavy-set man nodded in agreement. "Besides, David here has a way of smoothing things over when his investments pay off. Your boss might just thank you for bringing some life back to this place." Lisa took a deep breath and looked at the piano again. From where she stood, she could see that the bench was pushed slightly under the keyboard, and a thin layer of dust had settled on the music stand. The lid was closed, which meant she would have to open it, making her intentions obvious to everyone in the restaurant before she even played a single note. "What should I play?" she asked, more to herself than to anyone else. "What do you want to play?" David replied. "What piece of music lives in your heart, the one that you could play even if you woke up in the middle of the night?" Without hesitation, Lisa knew the answer. "Clair de Lune," she said softly. "Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was the first really difficult piece I ever learned, and it's the one I play when I need to remember why I love music." David smiled, and something in his expression told Lisa that she had given exactly the right answer. "Perfect. It's beautiful, it's recognizable, and it's the kind of piece that makes people stop what they're doing and listen." Lisa felt a strange calm settling over her, the same feeling she used to get before piano recitals when she was younger. Her grandmother had always told her that nervousness and excitement were the same feeling, just interpreted differently by the mind. Right now, she chose to interpret the butterflies in her stomach as excitement. "Okay," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Okay, I'll do it." The 4 men at table 12 exchanged glances that mixed anticipation with something that looked like pride. David reached across the table and gently took the notepad and pen from Lisa's hands. "You won't need these for the next few minutes," he said with a grin. "Go make some magic." Lisa walked toward the piano on legs that felt both weightless and heavy at the same time. Each step seemed to take forever, but also happened too quickly. She was vaguely aware of other servers moving around her, of customers glancing up as she passed their tables, of the gentle clink of silverware and glasses that formed the background music of every restaurant evening. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment and placed her hands on the smooth black surface of the lid. The instrument was even more beautiful up close, with rich wood grain visible beneath the glossy finish. She had dreamed of playing a piano like this someday, in a concert hall or maybe a fancy hotel lobby. She had never imagined it would be in the restaurant where she served tables to pay for college. Taking another deep breath, Lisa lifted the lid of the piano. The action was smooth and silent, well maintained despite months of neglect. The keys were revealed like a perfect smile, black and white in the traditional pattern that had been the foundation of her life for 15 years. She pulled out the bench and adjusted it to the right height, her movements automatic after years of practice. As she settled onto the bench, she became aware that the conversations in the restaurant were getting quieter. People were starting to notice the waitress who had sat down at the unused piano. Lisa placed her fingers on the keys and immediately felt the familiar resistance, the slight give that told her how the instrument would respond to her touch. David had been right about the tuning. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't perfect either. Some of the keys felt slightly sticky, and she could tell that a few notes in the higher register were a bit sharp. But her grandmother had always said that music wasn't about perfection. It was about emotion, about connecting with something deeper than technique or flawless execution. As Lisa positioned her hands for the opening measures of Clair de Lune, she thought about all the times she had played this piece. Late nights in her childhood bedroom, trying not to wake her parents. Nervous recitals in front of judges who decided whether she was good enough for the next level. Quiet moments alone when music was the only thing that could express what she was feeling. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter now. Lisa could sense people looking in her direction, curious about what was about to happen. At table 12, David sat perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him, watching her with the intense focus of someone who had just placed a very important bet. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, letting her fingers remember the feeling of the keys, letting her mind connect with the music that had lived inside her heart for so many years. When she opened her eyes, the restaurant seemed to shimmer slightly in the warm light from the chandeliers. She thought about her grandmother, who had sacrificed so much to give her that first piano. She thought about her dreams of teaching music to children, of sharing the joy that came from creating something beautiful. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen table and the student loan applications she couldn't afford to complete. And then, with all the courage she could gather, Lisa pressed down on the first key. The sound that emerged from the piano was pure and clear, floating through the restaurant like the first note of a song that everyone had been waiting to hear, without knowing it. The opening measures of Clair de Lune began to weave their gentle magic through the elegant dining room, and Lisa felt her entire world shift into a place where anything was possible. Around her, conversation stopped completely as people turned to watch the waitress who had just transformed into a musician before their eyes. The first few notes of Clair de Lune floated through the restaurant like drops of moonlight, each one perfect and crystal clear. Lisa felt her nervousness melt away as her fingers found their rhythm, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing this piece until it became part of her soul. At table 4, an elderly couple who had been quietly sharing dessert stopped their conversation mid-sentence. The woman's fork hovered halfway to her mouth as she turned toward the piano, her eyes widening with surprise and delight. Her husband reached across the table and gently took her hand, both of them now completely focused on the music flowing from the center of the room. Lisa's hands moved across the keys with growing confidence. The piano responded better than she had expected despite its months of silence. Yes, a few notes were slightly out of tune, but somehow that only added character to the performance, like a beautiful voice with just enough roughness to make it interesting. Near the bar, Tony finally looked up from his tablet. His expression went from confusion to concern to amazement in the space of about 10 seconds. He started to move toward the piano, probably to ask Lisa what she thought she was doing. But then the melody reached the sweeping middle section and he stopped walking entirely. His mouth opened slightly as he realized that his waitress, the quiet girl who had been working for him for 3 years, was playing like a concert pianist. David watched from his table with a smile that grew wider with each passing measure. His business instincts had been right again. He had built his fortune by recognizing talent that others overlooked, and tonight he was watching that talent bloom in real time. His companions sat in stunned silence, barely breathing as the music washed over them. "My God," Richard whispered, so quietly that only their table could hear him. "She's incredible." The heavy-set man nodded, his whiskey still untouched as he leaned forward to hear every note. "David, how did you know?" "I didn't know," David replied softly, his eyes never leaving Lisa's hands as they danced across the keyboard. "But I hoped. Sometimes that's all you need." As the piece moved into its most challenging section, Lisa felt something magical happening. The restaurant around her seemed to fade away, and she was transported back to her childhood bedroom, playing for an audience of stuffed animals and dreams. But at the same time, she was more present than she had been in months, more connected to her purpose and passion than she had felt since she started working double shifts just to make ends meet. A young couple at table 8 had pulled out their phones and started recording. Not in the intrusive way that people sometimes did, but with the reverence of those who recognized they were witnessing something special. The soft glow from their screens mixed with the warm light from the chandeliers, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere around the piano. Lisa's training took over completely now. Her left hand provided the gentle, rolling bass line that gave the piece its dreamlike quality, while her right hand sang the melody that had made Debussy famous over a century ago. Every dynamic marking, every subtle change in tempo, every delicate phrase that she had practiced thousands of times, all came together in this moment. At table 16, a businessman who had been loudly discussing quarterly reports with his associates fell completely silent. He had attended dozens of corporate dinners, countless networking events, and more business lunches than he could count, but he had never experienced anything like this. The music seemed to reach into his chest and remind him of things he had forgotten he cared about. The kitchen staff began gathering at the service window. Cooks, dishwashers, and prep workers who had been focused on the dinner rush found themselves drawn to the unexpected concert happening in their dining room. Maria, the head chef, wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out of the kitchen entirely, something she never did during service hours. "Is that Lisa?" she asked Tony, who was still standing frozen halfway between the bar and the piano. Tony could only nod, apparently having lost the ability to speak. As the piece reached its climactic moment, Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the pure joy of doing what she was born to do. Every sacrifice, every double shift, every night she had fallen asleep over textbooks, all of it had led to this moment. Her fingers found the high, delicate notes that marked the piece's emotional peak, and she played them with a tenderness that made several people in the audience catch their breath. An older gentleman at the bar, a regular customer who usually spent his evenings reading financial newspapers while nursing a single scotch, slowly closed his paper and turned his full attention to the performance. He had heard this piece performed at Carnegie Hall, by pianists whose names were known around the world, but somehow this version, played by a waitress on a slightly out-of-tune piano in a restaurant, touched him more deeply than any of those professional performances ever had. The melody began to wind down, settling into the gentle, peaceful resolution that gave the piece its name. Moonlight. That's what Claire de Lune meant, and that's exactly what Lisa's performance felt like. Soft, beautiful, mysterious light illuminating a world that had seemed ordinary just moments before. Lisa played the final measures with exquisite care, each note floating into the silence like the last leaves falling from a tree in autumn. The restaurant had become so quiet that the only sounds were the gentle whisper of the piano keys and the soft intake of breath from 40 people who had just witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. As the last note faded into silence, Lisa kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, not quite ready to break the spell that had settled over the room. She could feel the weight of all those eyes watching her, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Then, somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Within seconds, the entire dining room erupted in applause that was unlike anything Lisa had ever heard. It wasn't the polite, measured clapping that you might hear at the end of a business presentation. This was the kind of applause that comes from the heart, spontaneous and genuine and full of gratitude. People weren't just clapping for the performance. They were clapping for the courage it had taken to give it, for the beauty that had just filled their evening, for the reminder that extraordinary things could happen in the most ordinary moments. The elderly woman at table 4 was crying openly now, her husband's arm around her shoulders as they both applauded with tears streaming down their faces. The businessman at table 16 was on his feet, clapping with the same enthusiasm he usually reserved for successful product launches. Even the kitchen staff was applauding from the service window, their dinner preparations temporarily forgotten. Lisa slowly turned on the piano bench to face the room, and the volume of applause somehow grew even louder. She saw Tony standing near the bar with his mouth still open, saw Maria beaming at her from the kitchen doorway, saw customers she had served hundreds of times looking at her with new respect and admiration. But most of all, she saw David at table 12, standing with the rest of his party, applauding with a smile that told her everything she needed to know about whether she had succeeded in their wager. The applause continued for what felt like forever, washing over Lisa like warm sunshine after months of cold rain. For the first time in years, she felt like the musician she had always dreamed of being, not just the waitress she had become out of necessity. The applause seemed to go on forever, but eventually it began to fade as people settled back into their seats, still buzzing with excitement about what they had just witnessed. Lisa stood up from the piano bench on slightly shaky legs, her heart still racing from the performance and the incredible response it had received. David was already walking toward her, that confident smile still lighting up his face. Behind him, his business partners followed, all of them looking like they had just watched something remarkable happen. As he approached the piano, other customers began standing up from their tables, some of them approaching as well, eager to congratulate Lisa on her unexpected performance. "That was absolutely beautiful," said the elderly woman from table 4, reaching Lisa before David could get there. Her eyes were still bright with tears, and she took Lisa's hands in her own. "I haven't heard Debussy played like that in years. You have a gift, dear." Her husband nodded enthusiastically. "We've been coming to this restaurant for 5 years, and tonight was the most special evening we've ever had here. Thank you for sharing your talent with us." More people gathered around the piano, each wanting to express their appreciation. The businessman from table 16 shook Lisa's hand firmly and pressed his business card into her palm. "If you ever want to perform at corporate events, call me," he said. "My company would pay very well for entertainment like that." Lisa felt overwhelmed by the attention, but in the best possible way. For years she had played piano alone in practice rooms and empty classrooms, dreaming of having an audience that truly appreciated her music. Now she was surrounded by people who had been moved by her performance, and their genuine enthusiasm filled her heart with warmth. Tony finally made his way through the small crowd that had formed around the piano. Lisa braced herself for anger, or at least confusion, about why his waitress had suddenly become a performer during her shift. Instead, Tony's face was filled with amazement and something that looked like pride. "Lisa," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. 3 years. 3 years you've been working here, and I had no idea you could do that. That was incredible." "I'm sorry," Lisa started to say. "I know I should have asked permission, and I know I left my tables." Tony held up his hand to stop her. "Are you kidding me? Look around this place. I've never seen my customers this happy. Half of them are probably going to become regulars, just hoping you'll play again." As if to prove his point, Maria appeared from the kitchen with a huge grin on her face. "Lisa, honey, that was amazing. The whole kitchen stopped working just to listen. Even the dishwashers came out to hear you play." David finally reached the piano as the crowd began to thin out slightly. He waited patiently for Lisa to finish talking with the other well-wishers, but his presence was impossible to ignore. When the immediate rush of congratulations died down, he stepped forward with that same confident smile. "So," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake, "I believe we had a deal." Lisa took his hand, still hardly believing that this was really happening. "Does this mean—" "It means you just earned yourself a full college education," David said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "That performance was everything I hoped it would be and more. You didn't just play music, Lisa. You created magic." Richard and the other 2 men from David's table had finally caught up, and they were all grinning like they had just witnessed their friend pull off the deal of the century. "David has a good eye for talent," Richard said to Lisa, "but even he didn't expect anything quite like that. You've got something special, young lady." David pulled out his phone and opened his calendar app. "Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow? Say 1 o'clock at the cafe on 5th Street, the one next to the bookstore? We have some details to work out." Lisa nodded, still feeling like she was living in a dream. "Yes, of course. I can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it," David said. "And Lisa, don't quit your day job just yet. But I have a feeling you're going to have some interesting career decisions to make very soon." As David and his party returned to their table to finish their dinner, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal evening rhythm. But there was something different in the air now. An energy and excitement that hadn't been there before. Conversations were more animated, laughter came easier, and there was a general sense that everyone had been part of something special. Lisa walked back toward the kitchen in a daze, still trying to process everything that had happened. As she passed tables, customers smiled at her warmly, some offering additional congratulations or asking questions about her musical background. She had never experienced anything like this at work before. Tony intercepted her before she could reach the employee area. "Lisa, I want you to know that piano is available to you anytime you want to play it. In fact, I'm thinking about advertising live music again. Would you be interested in playing here regularly? Maybe Friday and Saturday evenings?" The offer was tempting, but Lisa's mind was still reeling from David's promise about college. "Can I think about it? A lot just changed in my life and I need to figure out what comes next." "Of course," Tony said. "Take all the time you need. But that offer isn't going away." The rest of Lisa's shift passed in a blur of congratulations and questions from coworkers who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The other servers kept asking her to play again, but Lisa felt like she needed time to process what had happened before she performed again. When her shift finally ended at 10 o'clock, Lisa sat in her car in the parking lot for several minutes just trying to make sense of the evening. She pulled out David's business card and stared at it, then looked at the card the businessman had given her, then at her phone, which was full of text messages from coworkers who had already posted videos of her performance on social media. Her phone buzzed with a call from her roommate, who had seen one of the videos online. "Lisa, oh my God, is this really you playing piano? People are sharing this video everywhere. You're like internet famous right now." Lisa looked at the shares and comments on the video. Hundreds of people had already seen her performance and the numbers were climbing rapidly. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, with people praising her talent and the courage it had taken to perform spontaneously. But more than the online attention, more than the promise of paid education, what filled Lisa's heart was the memory of those faces in the restaurant. The elderly woman who had cried, the businessman who had stopped his meeting to listen, the kitchen staff who had abandoned their posts just to hear her play. She had given them something beautiful, something that had made their ordinary Tuesday evening into something they would never forget. As she drove home through the quiet city streets, Lisa thought about her grandmother, who had always believed that music was meant to be shared, that the greatest gift a musician could give was to touch someone's heart through their art. Tonight, she had finally understood what her grandmother meant. The next morning would bring lunch with David and discussions about her future. There would be decisions to make about school, about her career, about whether to accept Tony's offer to play regularly at the restaurant. But tonight, driving home under the stars, Lisa simply felt grateful for the chance to remember who she really was, underneath all the practical concerns and financial worries. She was a musician, and for the first time in years that felt like enough.